So welcome everyone. Welcome to the first of our TICR Talks that are explaining our project on working together to reduce carbon emissions in the sector. So it's just taking a little while to admit everybody and to get everything sorted out. So while you're just dropping in, I'll just say hello and welcome. My name is Miriam Rodway. I work for the Institute of Refrigeration, and we're supporting the TICR project with some of the communications and marketing side of things. We've got some speakers today who'll be telling us a little bit more about the work that we've been doing in the project, particularly focused this time on data centers. And we'll have future TICR talks that you've probably seen on the webinar that look at some of the different areas that the project is covering. This here is our program for the day. I'd encourage everybody on the call to use the chat box. If you can open up and find the chat box, put your name in there, introduce yourself. Our speakers will introduce themselves as we go through, but also a chance for you to say who you are, where you're from, and why you've joined today. And that will give you a bit of a chance to see who else is on the call and the kind of interest levels and the kind of background for when we get to the discussion at the end. If you have any questions for any of our speakers today, please just put them again in the chat box. That way that they'll be able to read them. And then we've got a discussion session at the end there where we'll be able to pick up on those questions, particularly if there's several questions of a similar topic. We'll make sure that all those questions are brought together. And we've got some questions for you as well to get some feedback on what we're presenting so far. Very much work in progress at the moment. So it's early results, and we're really looking forward to getting some feedback from yourselves. So as everybody, I think, is in at the moment, and we just got more people arriving as well, make sure you keep yourself on mute so there's not too much background noise. And please do pop something in the chat box to say hello, where you're from, and also use that for your questions and discussions later on. So I will hand straight over to Katerina, if you'd like to take control of the screen, Kat, and you can tell us more about the project.
Okay. Thank you, Miriam, and good morning, everyone. Hopefully you can see my screen. Excellent. So I'm Katerina Marquez. I'm a senior research fellow at London South Bank University. I'm an IOR trustee, and I'm also leading the TICR project. So TICR stands for Transport, Industrial and Commercial Refrigeration. So this is a research project that is funded by the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero. And as Miriam mentioned, we are going to present to you some of the initial results from the project, and we really welcome your feedback. So, and this is the first in a series. So the first one is data centers, but we have a lot more TICR talks planned. But why TICR? Why this project? Well, cooling produces more than 7% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions, and these emissions are expected to double by 2050. This is mainly in developing countries where there is more demand for cooling, but this is also happening in the UK, the increased demand for cooling with increased ambient temperatures. So transport, industrial and commercial refrigeration, they enable safe provision of food and pharmaceuticals and reliable supply of IT infrastructure. And industrial refrigeration in the UK, the emissions from this sector are largely unknown. And there is a significant opportunity to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions from cooling. And this can be through innovations, skills, energy provision, and new policy. So what the project is doing is investigating the emissions from cooling in the UK and evaluating how to decarbonize the sector. And this is quite timely because COP28 is going to be in December, is focused on cooling, and it's likely that the UK will sign a cooling pledge at COP. So a bit more about the project scope. So within transport, we're looking at road transport refrigeration units. Within the industrial sector, we're looking at chemical and pharmaceuticals, food and drink manufacturing, data centers, which is the focus of the talk today, retail and cold stores. So the project, it will deliver a data-driven whole systems approach, and the aim is to support decarbonization and innovation strategies across all these 6 sectors. And we're going to do that by first determining the carbon emissions from refrigeration, so scope 1 and scope 2 emissions, and that you'll hear more about it today. We're going to develop roadmaps with that map the innovations that kind of establish the way of how to decarbonize the sector. We're carrying out site surveys. We're going to develop benchmarks that identify poor, good, and average performance. So it allows for comparison of sites. And we need that, we need the benchmarking. It's quite critical because how can you improve if you don't know how you perform? We're going to develop resources. This is for end users, for contractors, for installers. And finally, we're going to identify policy opportunities. And we'll be engaging with the industry throughout the project. We want your feedback. We want to make sure any policy suggestions that we make to government have the industry backing. So that's why we are engaging throughout the project. And finally, we have these websites, so netzerorefrigeration.uk. So this is where we'll publish the roadmaps and all other project resources. So this will be live throughout the project. And we have a live survey. I've actually just dropped the link in the chat, but this survey is about identifying the key priorities for maintenance, design, and training. Again, this is a way you can contribute to the project by responding to the survey. So have a look in the chat. And this is the TICR team. So led by LSPU, we have Carbon 3 IT. John is going to present to you today, later on. We have Carbon Trust, Star Technical Solutions, the IOR, Carbon Limiting Technologies, and the University of Birmingham. So that's our team, the consortium that's delivering the project. And that's all for me. I'll hand over now to Matt, who is going to tell you more about data center emissions.
Thanks very much, Katerina. So Matt, if you just want to share your screen and unmute yourself, and you can tell us about the emissions profile for the sector. So Matt's a senior researcher at London South Bank University.
I trust this works.
Looking good.
Okay, great. You can see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Good morning, everyone. My name is Matt Begner. I'm a postgraduate researcher at London South Bank. I'm very fortunate to be among other people supervised by Kat. My work on the project was focusing on estimating the emissions profile from the sector, so-called desk research, and also I participated in the site surveys with John Booth, whose presentation will follow mine. To the next slide. The data centers are split into three main categories, and it's a question of ownership, among other things. Managed services and colocation, which often can be actually treated as one, whereby a company owns a data center and leases the equipment to the customers. And enterprise. Enterprise are privately owned data centers, often but not always located on the company premises. And the main difference between those two categories, treating managed services and colocation as one, is that we know quite a lot about colocations because they're the information about colocation of data centers is shared publicly in order to gain customers, whereas enterprise data centers often keep the information to themselves. Published estimates suggest that there are around 500 data centers operating in the UK, large ones. This is the number that floats around the internet, but when you look into different sources of data, those numbers start to blur out. We know that the UK data center sector contributes a tremendous amount of output, exports, and employment into the British economy, and it's a really fast-growing industry. How do data centers use energy? You can see on the chart on the left, this chart will change depending on the efficiency of data center, but it's fair to say that around half of the energy, the electricity going into the data center, is used to power the AT systems, and then around 40%, in this case, 38% of the electricity is used for cooling. This can be larger or smaller. But essentially, all of the electricity that goes into the data center leaves the data center as heat. And there are two main approaches to data center cooling. It's either using air or coolant. And typically, the heat leaves the data center into the atmosphere. One of the data sources used in the research was the data from climate change agreements, so-called CCA, abbreviated as CCA, which is a scheme that's completely voluntary, and only collocations participated at the moment. And it's been the program has been split into separate target periods, and the latest target periods that we know that data from is target period 4, which stretches between December 2020 and May 2021, and that is the data that was used in the project. During that target period, 86 data centers were participating in the CCA. Why is this study different, and why is it important? So during the research, we used the data from the Evaluation Office Agency, which is it's an organization that helps estimate the value of buildings for the government, and also for the purpose of estimating the council tax. And as you can see, the numbers that we were crunching through are quite high. There are three main categories, special category codes of interest for this project, which are those assigned for computer centers which are purpose-built or non-purpose-built, and also the ones for offices. And you can see at the bottom of the slide, majority of that base is occupied by the offices, which we believe encompass the enterprise data centers. So this the slide on the right hand side, the part of the slide on the right hand side represents the flowchart that was followed, or the workflow that was followed throughout the research. So I've mentioned the data from Valuation Office Agency, and essentially what was done is the VOA dataset includes information on the size of the buildings, but also it includes subsections of the buildings and their size. And in case of those three special category codes, one of those subsections is the computer room. So that was used as the basis for estimating the size and what results from that, potentially the cooling load for server rooms inside those buildings. So a standard energy consumption factor was used in order to convert or estimate the requirement for cooling based on the size of the server room. And in case of the data from climate change agreements, the reported data from data centers is the scope 2 emissions. So those were converted into energy consumption. And then a number of other factors were used we couldn't estimate the cooling load. What's important to mention here that scope 1 emissions were estimated using the HFC outlook model, which is a product of the Glattman Consulting company. This table presents the results. Scope 1 emissions were extracted from the HFC outlook model, which is updated in 2022. Emissions from data centers were estimated based on CCA data for co-locations, but the results also include enterprise data centers, which were included in the VOA dataset. So in total, for 521 sites, we estimate scope 2 emissions to be 1.41 megatons of CO2 equivalent per year. In terms of energy use for refrigeration, the estimate is 6.65 terawatt hours per year, which is equivalent to over 2% of the UK electricity consumption. We also estimated what the emissions from office server rooms could be, and those results are presented underneath. There is a huge number of office buildings included in the VOA dataset, and you can see that the estimated annual energy consumption for cooling is close to that of data centers. And this sector is predicted to expand. According to published information, data center energy consumption increases by 10% year on year, and there is a 10% annual growth rate in numbers of data centers in the UK. According to the national grid, the data center electricity demand could reach up to 35 terawatt hours by 2050. The recommendation is, in order to have a full grasp of the scale of emissions, all types of data centers should participate in the CCA agreements and not just the co-locations. This concludes my part of the TICR talk, and I'd like to hand over to John Booth. Thank you for your attention, and I welcome questions, and I'll do my best to answer them.
Thank you, Matt. So John, if you'd like to take control, share the screen and unmute yourself. Any questions for Matt, please put them in the chat box and we'll pick them all up at the end. So John, over to you.
Thank you, Miriam. Okay, so following on from Matt's talk, let me just clarify some elements to that. So unfortunately, there is a lack of data from the information we have at the moment. And this is basically because a lot of the enterprise data centers are not required to report at the moment. And as Matt quite rightly suggested, the CCA information indicates around 12 terawatt hours in the TP4 period of the climate change agreement, but this is largely commercial data centers. Our findings from the site surveys were quite revealing, actually. So we did find in the surveyed sites, and remember, this is not representative of all of them, but if it is truly alarming, that we saw poor installation and operational practices from the refrigeration or cooling side of things in commercial data centers. Largely this was due down to the lack of cooling knowledge from the operational staff. We found that most of them were electrically focused rather than cooling focused. And this indicates a lack of training, which we will be addressing later on in this project. We also found some quite sharp business practices from some air conditioning companies, and I make no apology for highlighting this. You know, they are providing cooling services to the industry, but they should also be aware of climate emergency and resource management, etc. And just going into an organisation and replacing a chiller that maybe need replacing with a similar chiller instead of offering an alternative solution, it is, in my opinion, quite sharp. We found over-engineered cooling solutions being deployed throughout the sector. And just something else, there seems to be a big push on, data centres will be needing to operate in temperatures of 35 degrees C in the coming years. And this is instilling a degree of panic amongst certain operators. The last time we had this was in 2022, and only 3 data centres failed due to the excessive heat. And these failures were largely down to poor maintenance or design. So I think we need to start rolling back on some of this panic. Even if we do have temperatures of over 35 degrees, it's going to be for days, not months or permanently. So there needs to be a rollback from some of the operators on that type of thing. What we found also is that there is a lack of using the EU Code of Conduct cooling best practices. And you know, this really annoyed me because the Code of Conduct has been around for nearly 12 years now, 14 years actually, and it contains significant and useful best practices for data centres to follow. And we found that largely operators were picking and choosing which of the best practices they were doing. And that's not really the intention of the Code of Conduct in any way, shape or form. It is a journey. You start at the beginning, you get to the end. And it really is imperative that operators start to look at all of the best practices rather than cherry picking. So some of our findings, what we found is that cleaning best practices, which are to go against airflow, were clearly not being done. People were cleaning from the outside in the direction of the airflow, and all this does is drag the debris and dirt that accumulates on the coils deeper into the coil, which can cause maintenance issues and degradation of those coils moving forward. In some of the sites, we actually went back and did some additional work on them, and they were seeing significant energy savings from just cleaning properly. So I'd urge everybody to start cleaning your coils via the manufacturer's instructions and clarify it with them and not the service provider. It might cost you a little more because you may need to put some scaffolding up and remove some fans and then clean from the inside. But believe me, this will reveal and result in significant savings. We found uninsulated pipework inside service corridors. And this is parasitic heat. So it basically adds to your problem within the white space. So if you do have any uninsulated pipework in the service corridors, please start to insulate them. And then by the same token, we found insulation on the external elements, and this is precisely where you don't need it. So we did ask a couple of questions about why this was being done, and from an air conditioning manufacturer. And they basically said it's for health and safety reason. And but we don't subscribe to that at all. Those areas should be a zone 3 in EN 5600 as a defence in depth principle, and only suitably authorised personnel should be allowed in those areas. If they don't know to touch pipework, then there is no savings, to be honest. So what are the challenges moving forward? We do have the F-gases regulation, which is going to result in the removal of certain gases from general market sale. So organisations are going to have to think about replacement for refrigerant gases in the future. We've obviously had the recent energy spike and prices are still high. So you probably need to deal with that. And if you leave in energy savings from your cooling on the table, you know, you could save a considerable amount of money just by optimizing your refrigeration systems. We found a lack of innovation thinking throughout all of the surveyed sites and potentially elsewhere as well. We need to start thinking about the energy reuse. That's now an EU Code of Conduct, an energy efficiency directive best practice. That will be very interesting to see how that plays out if similar legislation is deployed in the UK. We need to think about using the waste heat for urban farms and district heating and other industrial processes. There are some EU and US legislation on the horizon: the Taxonomy Climate Delegated Act, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, and as mentioned earlier, the Energy Efficiency Directive. At the moment, none of those apply in the UK, but I would imagine sooner rather than later it will hop the channel. And bearing in mind, we've also got this global skill shortage of upward of 400,000 globally, and this is likely to manifest itself in a grey tsunami where 50% of the current staff will be retiring by 2030. So it's imperative that we start to look at training as well. Part of our task was to look at what data centres look like in 2030. The legacy estate will still be in operation, but we should be seeing replacements potentially coming up through end of life. So there is an opportunity to move to more innovative cooling solutions. There needs to be some planning guidance on heat reuse and potentially digital heat. And it's good to see that companies like Heater and Deep Green are looking at the decentralized compute and edge areas where they're providing their waste heat for residential and commercial purposes. I think that there will be a radical redesign of data centers moving forward. Design principles will need to change, and microgrid. We need to think about artificial intelligence and how that's going to impact the cooling requirements, and machine learning, which will all contribute to potentially be addressed by or not addressed by the skill shortage. But new developments in IT, such as graphene chips or quantum compute, may change this entirely. In 2050, we'll still have the legacy estate in operation, and this is the stuff that's built between 2023 and 2030, because they'll have a design life of 25 years. We might see more focus on hydrogen fuel cells as primary power with the grid as backup. That will require a redesign of primary power distribution, and it could also mean a redesign of cooling systems. Free cooling with chiller coils for extreme temperatures, a lot more waste heat reuse as dictated by the EU legislation, and not to forget greater use of immersed compute, which is very much a flavour of the month at the moment. But again, this all could be rendered moot by graphene chips or innovations in ICT equipment. Finally, as Katerina mentioned, we are creating a roadmap of where to go in the future, and we're working on that at the moment, but it's likely to be an update of the Catalyst project roadmap that was delivered for the EU in 2020. We've also made some policy recommendations to UK government. These haven't been clarified by them as yet, but they're down on the table. So a central UK HMG contact point, which is in the process of being done, I think. There's some work on the NDCA, which we'll cover in the next slide. We've offered some planning guidance, a spatial strategy for data centres moving forward, some cooling guidance and potential market reform. Under the National Data Centre Academy, this will be providing training for grads, transition people from the oil and gas and military, updates to existing personnel, and to showcase innovative products, fuel cells, battery energy storage systems, renewables, immersed compute, and deal with some R&D moving forward. And that's my bit finished. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, John, and all our speakers. So reminding everybody, there's a lot of information coming out here. It's very much work in progress. Things are coming together, and that's all being pulled together by the team at Southbank into the future output. So what we really want to do now is get some input from yourselves to help consider about how we're going to use this material and how useful it's going to be for you. So we had a question for you, if I can work out how to share the screen. We had a couple of questions for you. We start to get thinking about how you might consider. So for starting off, we want to ask you to think about what the most important takeaway is from these findings, or if not a takeaway, at least the thing that really struck you in particular about the whole thing. What do you think is going to be the most impactful results of this? What did you learn that you perhaps didn't realize, or that might even have surprised you about this? And then we're going to have a bit of a discussion with our panel. And I'd also like to invite Steve Hone to join the panel. Steve is a part of the Data Center Alliance, and he will, I'm just adding you in here, Steve, and he might also have some interesting things to add. So Steve, if you'd like to unmute, I think that's just coming on. Your camera's already on and you can join us as well. So any questions or thoughts, please put them in the chat box about the most important thing that came to you based on the presentations you've heard. I'll start things off with talking perhaps to John. You mentioned the cost of maintenance and that these things can actually save people energy. Has any work been done to look at where, like, if you like, that tipping point is? Can you evaluate exactly how much you can save? Because I guess there are people cutting back all the time on things like maintenance contracts. So where is the point at which that investment will actually save them money?
I think it starts immediately. As soon as you do the exercise, you will start to see the savings.
So that's what you think, but is there any evidence? I mean, is that part of the project that they're doing some, I don't know, some sort of calculation? Has anybody done any monitoring that you're aware
of? Yes, we did some work with cooling and cleaning for one of the TICR survey sites separately, and that indicated something like a 8% decrease in energy costs just by cleaning the coils properly. So, and it was almost immediate. So as soon as the cleaning had been done proper fashion, then those
they could see the savings
absolutely, yeah,
straight away. And that was just one element of that maintenance regime.
Yeah.
Okay. So there's an awful lot that, you know, as part of the roadmaps, presumably you'll be looking at the savings opportunities straight away, both financial and environmental.
Absolutely. The roadmap will cover the cleaning regime and will provide some focus on how much there could be savings. But it just using the prudent application of the EU Code of Conduct in best practices in general across the data center estate can be, you know, depends on how radical you want to be on it. But, you know, applying the code of conduct will result in significant energy savings. And it may be just by doing an analysis of your installed ICT equipment and removing some of the zombie servers that the Uptime Institute have been banging on about for the last 10 years, which should be an automatic best practice anyway under ITIL kind of project management and management elements. And then when you start to actually look at the cooling side of things and optimizing your temperatures and securing your airflow across the systems, then significant energy savings can be made. And I think part of the problem is that most organizations pay little attention to their data center services until they go down, and then there's a big panic. But the maintenance of and reliability of those systems really depends on constant maintenance. It's like a finely tuned motor car. You know, if you were to compare a Formula One car with a standard car, and you know, if you don't maintain them properly, they will start to lose their potency and will start to cost you more money.
And they're critical facilities as well, so reliability comes into that equation too.
Absolutely. You know, there is so much that could be done that isn't being done.
I don't know whether, Steve, did you want to add anything into that? You're representing, I guess, the associations, the trade association, and supporting these practices. What do your members respond to on that one?
First, thank you very much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be with you today. Yeah, on the subject, lots of things to think about. On the subject of cleaning regimes and maintenance, I think, you know, it makes sense that any preventative maintenance is going to reduce risk to start with. So it makes good commercial sense, you know, to follow those practices. But over and above that, as John has mentioned, there are savings that can be made in respect to energy consumption by adopting, a rigorous and continual cleaning regime. The DCA has a number of special interest groups that work within the UK Trade Association. One of them is on anti-contamination and cleaning, and they produce a report every single year. It started off being about 3 pages long. It's now about 35 pages long. It covers all sorts of stuff. In some respects, it's really informative. In other ways, if you've got, if you're struggling to sleep, it's a great read sometimes, because it goes into all sorts of, sort of like all the particle contaminations, zinc whiskers, cleaning regimes, best practices both inside and outside the data center, all driving towards, at the end of the day, improving the efficiency of the data center. And that group is also working on several projects with data centers, which are kind of like a before and after assessment to try and put some meat on the bone in respect to potential savings. It's tricky to find data centers that are prepared to let you go in and actually, confess that actually they don't follow process, but they are willing. But there are actually a couple that have allowed us to go in who recognise the value of it. Obviously, this is on the back of some of our members that are offering a cleaning service free of charge in exchange for the pre-post data of savings, and that's going on at the moment, and that's taking place. So I think maybe watch your space in the next 3-4 months. Hopefully we'll have some decent output and some data that we can actually put to, I guess, your question originally, which was
evidence.
How much can you save?
I mean, it sounds as though that maintenance might be starting to come higher up the agenda when you look at these environmental objectives. I mean, I don't know, Matt, did you have anything to add on that in terms of, you had some big figures there for energy. Have you done any work on how much could be saved? I mean, you're just looking presumably at the current use, but any feeling for how much of that can be reduced?
I think the points John raised in his presentation are very valid. I mean, from my point of view, the research I'm dedicating my time to is recovery of heat, and by recovering the heat, the emissions can be reduced, and the electricity prices can be reduced as well for the consumers.
It sounds like a bit of a combination of both getting that maintenance, getting them working more efficiently, and using the heat could actually double that saving.
Absolutely.
We're getting a couple of questions coming in about the scale in terms of one from Graham Maidman about the comprehensive data analysis addresses complexity of segmenting large and small data centers and useful analysis. And then there's a question from Peter saying, what extent does the maintenance issue advice for large data centers also apply to office servers? So is there anything coming out of the research that looks at segmenting, if you like, the market between the very different things that need to be done for large specialist servers versus the larger number of smaller ones, or are they the same issues?
I'll take that one. Yeah. So obviously in a server room, you don't have the complexity of a kind of larger data centers cooling system. So the best thing to do there is to consider using the ASHRAE temperature range, which is 18 to 27, and to increase the temperatures that are within the facility or the room to more near 24, 25 degrees C rather than the 18 to 21 degrees C that we see at the moment. And a lot of people are really worried about raising their temperatures, especially in smaller server rooms. But if you look through the operations and maintenance manuals of the equipment, you'll see that they're actually rated for anywhere between 10 to 32 degrees C, and they're warranted for that. So moving up to 24, 25 degrees in your server room will reap a significant energy reward, and it shouldn't impact the operation too much as long as it's been configured correctly. So what I've found is when you walk into server rooms, you find that the air conditioning units are not in the right locations. So, you know, you need to think about the actual best practices that apply to where the systems are located. And that could mean just turning the cabinet around so that it, you know, and this could be seen as a bit of you know, a major mission. But actually, when you start to look into it, it really isn't. And you will save so much on the energy side of things. But some of the other best practices that are contained within the EU Code of Conduct, such as blanking panels, and optimizing your cooling and refrigeration, will reap rewards. And I would say anywhere between 10 and 15%.
So we're starting to really rack up those numbers in terms of savings. It's good stuff.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think if you were to be really, really radical in your ICT estate and use all of the EU Code of Conduct best practices, there are absolutely mind-blowing, significantly savings to be made.
Thank you. I mean, let's go on to the next question that I had. I'll change the slide, but Claire will put it in the chat box about what changes does a sector need to make to deliver net zero? Because it looks as though the knowledge is there. You've got a great code of conduct. You've got lots of ideas. You know that there are potential technologies as well. And maybe this brings in, Kat, some of the foundation around the project. You know, where do you see the motivators and the pressures for the industry to change? Is that something the project's going to help to provide? I don't know. Again, you're on mute at the moment, so if you want to put you on the spot there. But based on what we've heard, you know, we're talking about technology, but we're also talking about this sort of how you manage your systems as well.
I think what's coming from the side surveys, not just the ones John has done, but also Star Technical Solutions going into you know, retail and cold stores, is kind of how key is to design the systems well, and also have the maintenance in place, but at the same time making sure that the system is continuously optimized, that we're not just maintaining the system that is optimized, that we check the energy consumption, that is there is this continuous effort to reduce the energy consumption. So that this is definitely becoming clear, and also looking at the whole system is quite key. So hopefully we'll be able to produce roadmaps that will help guide the industry. So we are looking at different innovations, we're modeling their impact that will feed into the roadmaps. We're looking at payback periods. So all of these documents should be able to guide the industry.
But do you think, is that enough in terms of, I mean, John was saying, you know, I was again struck by what he said about that people, they've got a code of conduct, I think you said, for data centers, which is there, which shows what can be saved. Then people are doing bits of it and cherry picking what seems easy. You know, has there any thought in the project about how you're going to really drive change through?
I mean, one thing that we thought about creating is almost like a survey template, like an audit, so that when contractors go into a data center, they have a list of things to check that focus more on improving the efficiency rather than just, you know, checking is running. So hopefully that would help address that point. And we'll be providing the guidance documents for the end users and contractors and installers. So that's how we are planning to address that. But any other suggestions are definitely welcome. And I just noticed John has shared the code of conduct in the chat. So
I think from my perspective, the key element here is education. I think that we've got a situation, especially in what I would call non-commercial data centers, so more on the enterprise, that most of the people within the IT department are focused on IT, and the actual maintenance operation and operation of the facility usually comes down to the building manager, and the building manager may not be aware of the difference between comfort cooling for air-conditioned offices and IT cooling in specific technical rooms. And that really is a matter of education. So under the TICR project, we are developing a series of short kind of little modules explaining the principles of refrigeration, a code of conduct, optimization techniques that will be in short, bite-sized, hour-long presentations that people can look at during the lunch break, and then hopefully in the afternoon go and implement some of them, which will reveal significant savings to be had. I have been to countless server rooms, and you walk in and your heart just despairs because you see, I've even seen boxes and doors up against cooling units affecting the airflow, and the room's hot, and you think, well, why is it hot? Because somebody in here has decided to use it as a storeroom rather than a technical room. And they should be locked up as well. There's a lot of things that can be applied.
And these are common issues in building services, air conditioning, in industrial. Yeah, these are very common issues, aren't they?
Absolutely. And I was talking to somebody at the DCD event last week who was talking to me about REBA, and REBA being the Royal Institute of Architects. And he was saying, at what stage would you start to implement like cooling and sustainability into your data center design? And I said, well, it's at stage 1. Right? You can't just sort of go, we're going to put it in at stage 4 when you're doing the detailed technical design. It has
it's a little bit too late, isn't it? The building's already built.
And absolutely. But the other thing is that REBA doesn't really have any knowledge of server room installations. And when I go to sites, I see, built new sites, you just see a server room and it'll have server room by others, right? And it'll be in the center of the building. And that means you can't adopt free cooling techniques, for instance, So there was a lot of, part of, hopefully, some of our training modules can be syndicated to the architectural practices and say, look, we all know what you've done, but you're really designing server rooms for the 20th century, and you need to start thinking about delivering the server rooms for the 21st century.
Yeah, it's really, from the Institute of Refrigeration's role is on communications and liaising with stakeholders, and it really seems there's a lot to be done outside the technical expertise with building owners, with operators, with designers, with architects. And I'm feeling from this event a sense of the theme of integration. It's not just integration, heating, cooling, integration with the rest of the building, but integration of trades or professions, let's say, of the different people involved. They've all got their own area of work. Might be keep the system running or achieve this amount of capacity, but there's not an overview of keeping this equipment really efficient. So I think that we're running out of time, but that kind of comes on to the last kind of question or area we want to discuss was about policy mechanisms, and what policy mechanisms would be needed, because you can produce lots of guidance, lots of information, lots of codes. You can produce lots of data about where the energy is, what the benchmarks is. How are we going to make sure that people actually do this thing and that it's applied evenly so that there's no disadvantage for those who invest more against those who just keep things ticking over? Are there any thoughts around the policy? I think you did mention quite a few actually in your talk there, John, didn't you? Is there one that you say would be the priority, the key policy? Should it be this idea Kat was talking about, annual building audits, building surveys, performance?
Well, there's already the TM44 regulations for air conditioning systems, which is on a 5-year basis, but I think their use and usefulness has been patchy.
Yeah. And I'm not sure it covers data. Does it cover data centers? Is it more just general building services?
No, absolutely. If you are using anything over 12 kilowatts of thermal removal, then you
industrial processes.
Definitely industrial processes. It is quite limited, though. I have done some research on the TM44 stuff, and with postcodes, and you put a postcode in because there's a data center there. And then you look at it and there isn't any register of that particular data center on that. So maybe some of them are being missed by the TM44 regulations. Or somebody maybe I think it's an education piece again, that the building manager may not know that he's over the threshold, so he doesn't get the things working properly.
There are a lot of implementation issues there about enforcement and this type of thing, I understand.
Yeah, I think what we do need is I think the EU have really gone to town on the legislation pieces. I believe that they do recognise that they don't have good visibility of how much energy is being used across the member states for data centre energy. but they do know it's a significant amount, but they don't know how much it is. Hence the reason why the Energy Efficiency Directive does have a specific section within it for data centres. And there are 4 elements that need to be reported. And that starts by the 24th of May in 24. And that is total energy consumption, the amount of energy derived from renewable sources, either via power purchase agreements or solar or whatever on the roof, water usage metrics, and the amount of waste heat that's being delivered. Now, as a result of that, and that was only published literally about 4 weeks ago, the German Bundesweg, or whatever they're called, Parliament, actually published their Energy Efficiency Act, which has got all of the data center operators in Germany absolutely screaming, because it's got PUE targets. It's saying you must use your waste heat and all of this, and they're really, really unhappy. But as I said to them, look, this is a taste of what's going to happen. So stop whining and get on with it.
Well, it's something then for us to keep an eye on, I think, for Matt to give a good benchmark comparison to the research you've done to see what's coming out of Europe, and also for Kat to look for inspiration for the next stage of the project. Any closing comments? Because we are running over, and before we just do a little bit of a plug for the next events. Steve, first of all, did you want to say anything in terms of what you've heard in the debate or discussion? A single point that you want to raise with everyone?
Yeah. A couple of questions that you had, which was, what did you learn? I continually learn. Every day I learn, but nothing surprises me. I think we need to continue to educate and train. It's so important. Utilisation of code of conduct, essential. At the end of the day, recognition that actually, outside the Nordics region, fossil fuels is our main energy source. And until that changes, we all need to be, conscious of the fact that we're leaving a digital footprint in the sand, whether we be a commercial data center, or an individual human, an individual, who should have some kind of social contract to make sure that they are mindful of the digital service they're using, because it's not just about a data center facility. Actually, commercial data centers, because of course they're driven by potential profit margins, are actually doing quite a lot to ensure that we are, whether it's energy efficiency, are using the energy we are consuming as effectively as possible.
Yeah, so a role for everybody to work
there's no
together.
doubt that we're using energy, and we're going to use more of it, and statistics and forecasts on energy required for things like to support AI, for example, almost vertical. So it's about when you come to heat reuse, I wonder whether for a lot of places a district heating system is a step too far. A more local district heating solution, a local solution, is probably more practical and quicker to deliver for a lot of organizations. So if you're going to build a data center, or if you're next to something, speak to your neighbor and see if they can utilize your heat. So there is so much we could cover. I could speak for an hour on this.
It's complex, but that's why we're very grateful to our colleagues at DESNZ for.
And it is just bear in mind, it is a system of systems. So when you talk about lots of silos and lots of stakeholders, yes, it is, and it is a tricky one to square. But unless we've got to keep talking to them and educating them. Yeah,
and we've got to start somewhere. So that
would be my takeaway from it. Really,
it's a progress.
That's a
lot.
That's my takeaway.
Big takeaway. And I'd say running out of time. So Kat, I'll let the final word to you before I just say remind people the dates of the next meetings.
I just wanted to thank everyone for participating. This is the first TICR Talk. We're going to have a lot more, and we'll be engaging as the project progresses. So we definitely we welcome the views from the industry. Okay. So thank you all.
Thank you, Kat. Thank you to the speakers as well for sharing where you are with things. And I know things are evolving, but we are going to get there. So eventually there will be lots of project reports and things further down the line, and these training modules we're talking about all on the website. So keep an eye on things if you're interested in these areas. Next couple of talks for those interested in cold stores, 7th of November, and supermarkets. on the 16th of November. So similar talk, we'll be looking at results as they're coming in from the work that's been done and discussing how this work is going to help drive the net zero agenda. So thank you very much. Thank you for your attention and for joining us, and look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks again.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye, everyone. Bye.